A basic part of training for any war is to know the enemy, inside and out. One big reason pornography keeps such a hold over us is that we get confused about what it actually is. It's time to blow its cover. In this module, we'll be breaking down what we're up against in a number of ways, starting with an exploration of how we got to this point as a society in the first place. Compared to when your parents were growing up, things are very different today. So why have things changed? How did porn become so accepted and normal in our culture anyway? There are lots of reasons, but for now, over the next few videos, we'll focus on the 4 biggest contributors to how our culture became so pornified over the last several decades. The first contributor is something we've already spoken about plenty: a lack of knowledge. When we look back on our world's history and even our own personal history, we find that most of the time when we do something that is harmful to ourselves, it's because we just didn't know any better. Knowledge is often something that comes slowly and with time. As we discussed earlier, it was only recently that we started to discover that pornography was something that could be addictive and had harmful effects. That was not something we had a whole lot of scientific evidence on 30 years ago. In fact, around that time, one prominent person was arguing just the opposite, claiming that pornography was natural and even healthy. In 1948, Dr. Alfred Kinsey argued that all forms of sexual behavior should be normalized, and that people should pursue their sexual urges no matter how young or old the person was. At about that same time, one businessman took advantage of the same lack of knowledge, and a magazine called Playboy started hitting the newsstands. Playboy attempted to present pornography as something respectable by marketing itself as a men's lifestyle magazine with renowned journalists writing articles on topics ranging from politics to sports to fashion, which appeared alongside pornographic images. Because of this marketing tactic, the magazine's acceptance grew and paved the way for other publications to follow suit. Since then, thousands of magazines, film producers, and marketers have joined together to form an industry that today makes 4 times more money than the NBA, NFL, NHL, and MLB combined. Would all of this have happened if the public had been aware of the true effects of pornography on individuals and relationships? No way. Because of the overall lack of education and awareness on the true effects of pornography, we have allowed our society to become engulfed in a sexually hijacked culture. Contributor number 2, crazy awesome technology. Pornography has been around for a long time. It has shown up on cave walls, on ancient Greek pottery, and in medieval paintings. For the most part of human history, however, up to our parents' generation, pornography was something you had to, do some work to find. You either had to go somewhere or buy something. It certainly wasn't in everyone's face. All that started to change about 40 years ago with the creation of VHS tapes in 1971. Do you remember VHS tapes? Those giant black cassette tapes that play movies? The invention of VHS tapes made it possible for the first time for people to bring movies into their own homes. It also meant that you could record your own personal videos, something that was unheard of before. As a result, video rental stores opened up everywhere, many of them with a back room for pornographic rentals. And just like that, pornographic movies were suddenly showing up at home. DVDs soon replaced VHS tapes, and public acceptance of pornography continued to expand. Then came the internet. Boom. In 1993, an invention that changed the game forever. The internet has influenced nearly every aspect of our lives today, with the benefits that are obvious. Unfortunately, this invention has also multiplied the prevalence of pornography in our society exponentially. Almost overnight, pornography became available to anybody with an internet connection. It could be accessed without ever leaving your home. People didn't even have to rent anything. Today, many of you are walking around with some kind of internet-enabled mobile device, such as a laptop, smartphone, or tablet. Did your parents have those things growing up? Not even close. At that time, if someone wanted to access pornographic material, they had to go out and find it. And in most cases, the fear of getting caught was enough for them to keep their addiction at bay. For you, All the best and worst of the universe is just a few clicks away. Ain't technology great? Contributor number 3, the almighty dollar. Technology alone, of course, is not responsible for our pornified culture. At its most basic level, the media is just a messenger, neither positive nor negative in itself. As you know, technology can be used in many ways and for many reasons. And one of those reasons is this: making money. Once that becomes the top goal of those producing media, guess what? Anything that makes more money is fair game, even if it hurts people. And sure enough, it didn't take long for someone to try using sex to make more money. The earliest known use of pornography in advertising was by the Puro Tobacco Company in 1871, when the company featured a naked woman on the package cover. Another example is Woodbury's facial soap, a women's beauty bar. It was almost taken off the shelves in 1910 because nobody was buying it. The company gave one last attempt to increase sales by releasing an ad for the product that contained images of romantic couples and promises of love and intimacy for those using the brand. Guess what happened after they did that? Yup, their sales shot up significantly and they decided to keep the product on the shelves. Over the years, advertising companies have continued to find that sexuality is an effective way to increase a company's bottom line. Why do you think that is? To answer that question, let's think back to the brain science of addiction. As with drugs or alcohol, remember that high levels of chemicals are released into the reward pathway of the brain when someone is viewing pornography. That chemical flood starts not from injecting or inhaling anything, but instead from simply just taking images in through the eyes. Without knowing it, the media acts as this drug's distributor. And all an advertiser or TV producer has to do to get those addictive chemicals pumping in your brain is to show a little skin. As soon as media producers and advertising agencies realized that sex sells, it changed everything. Today, they continue to push closer and closer toward full-blown pornography because they know it will likely mean more dollars in their pockets. Anyone else a little irritated? Contributor number 4, things take time. So with all the new research, what's taking so long for things to change? Let's talk about the last contributor. Cultural change happens extremely slow. First, science has to catch up with the truth, then society's behaviors have to catch up with science. Bottom line, things don't change quickly. Tobacco, once again, provides a helpful illustration. People have been smoking for thousands of years. And for almost that long, most were convinced that it was harmless or even good for them. It wasn't until 1938 that Dr. Raymond Pearl discovered that smoking tobacco could cause lung cancer. And what do you think happened next? Did society immediately reject tobacco and build statues of Dr. Pearl, thanking him for a discovery that could save millions of lives? Nope. In fact, very few people even heard about him because the massive tobacco industry silenced his research and prevented it from going public. Not until nearly 15 years later, after Dr. Pearl had passed away, did his research see the light of day, when Reader's Digest published an article titled "Cancer by the Carton." That forced a public debate that eventually turned into a lawsuit that found its way to the Supreme Court, where the tobacco industry testified under oath that their product was in no way addictive. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent on both sides of the battle, which lasted over 40 years. Today, there isn't anybody around who would argue that smoking tobacco is good for you. Smoking still exists, of course, but those who are doing it are pretty well informed of what it can lead to. See, we're working for the same awareness to happen with pornography. Over the last few decades, hard evidence has emerged that pornography can actually cause harm to our brains and our relationships. However, this doesn't mean that our culture will immediately change its attitudes and perceptions on the issue. It will take years, perhaps decades, to have a complete cultural shift. Just as we look back and laugh at how we once thought smoking was good for you, one day, your kids will look back on this time and say, "Remember how we thought pornography was harmless? Yeah, that was crazy." At least you're ahead of the curve. So, there you have it. Ignorance, technology, money, and time. Now that we've reviewed these 4 contributors to where we are today, let's talk a little bit about pornography itself. When people find out that you're actually trying to quit pornography for good, you'll probably hear something like this. Watching porn is just expressing a natural drive, or suppressing these sexual urges is unhealthy. Have you heard something like this before? It's not a new idea. Nearly 100 years ago, Freud was saying the same kind of thing. 50 years later, that Kinsey guy we mentioned was pushing the idea that all sexual urges should be followed. Because the body has a built-in appetite for sex, the argument goes, pornography use is normal and natural. Is that true? What would you think if we told you that eating Twinkies is simply reflecting a natural drive that should not be restricted because the body has a built-in appetite for food? What do you think about that? The food industry has figured out that by combining certain ingredients, especially sugar, fat, and salt, they can trigger a huge chemical rush in your body and produce a dopamine punch to the cranium, enough to make us feel that our body needs and wants it. In fact, one researcher spent a whole year tracking down every ingredient that went into a Twinkie, all 39 of them. They include the preservative ascorbic acid derived from natural gas, artificial colors, and flavorings formulated from petroleum. Cellulose gum, polysorbate 60, and calcium sulfate are also ingredients. These are used in sheetrock, shampoo, and rocket fuel. And it's limestone that makes Twinkies lightweight. That's right. There are skeletons of marine microorganisms in coral in every bite. Bottom line, while the Twinkie is a finely crafted product that packs a punch in taste, it is only barely a food, with almost no nutritional value of any kind. Are you seeing the pornography comparison here? Look, stay with us. Have you ever wondered why sometimes you feel uneasy after eating junk food? Although the body may get an initial buzz off the food, the product has been so significantly altered from its original form that your body has a difficult time recognizing it as food. When substances are that unnatural, your body can actually switch into attack mode where white blood cells fight the food you eat as an invading enemy. How does this apply to pornography? Like an appetite for food, sexual feelings are, of course, part of normal physiology. When 2 people come together in a real sexual relationship, giving themselves to each other fully, the intensity of pleasure is powerful. That is natural and normal. What isn't normal is the complex system that different industries have developed to capitalize off our sexual appetite. The same way smokers get hooked on cigarettes. When we take the pornographic bait, our bodies get a buzz from a finely crafted product, one designed to maximize an immediate rush of pleasure. And yet, have you ever wondered why a dose of pornography sometimes leaves you empty and sickened? In pornography, healthy sexuality has been cut from its original form, soaked, filtered, boiled, synthesized, and wholly exaggerated, all with an aim of creating the biggest chemical rush possible in your system. That is why we talk about porn being a drug. Can you see how something destructive might actually feel like a positive experience? Now, when we say pornography in this discussion, we recognize that there are many forms of synthetic sexuality. Pornography can be visual, pictures or videos. It can be written, blogs, books, or articles, and it can even appear in music. It can also be interactive, such as online chatting or talking over the phone. What unites all of these is the fact that they're all a form of artificially enhanced sexual stimulation. Just as Twinkies are an artificially enhanced and modified food that really isn't good for you, pornography is an artificially enhanced and modified sexual experience that isn't good for you either, and your body and mind both know it. This should help you if you ever start to wonder, what's the difference between the experience of a healthy sexual relationship with a partner and the sexual experience of pornography? I mean, they're both sexual, so it's just 2 kinds of the same thing, right? Are they? Not even close. It's a pretty good question, though. Like Twinkies and whole grain bread, they may look similar on the outside, but they result in very different experiences. Imagine, for a moment, being lost in a blistering desert. After 2 days of wandering without any food or water, you come across an abandoned village on the beach of what seems to be the ocean. Your attention immediately focuses on the massive body of salt water crashing on the coast only a few hundred meters ahead. And then, in the corner of your eye, you notice a fresh water pump next to the nearest structure in an abandoned village. But all you can think about is drinking that cold ocean water. You think to yourself, water is water, isn't it? Whether I get it from the ocean or I find it in a village, it doesn't really matter, right? Actually, it does. You see, what you might not know is that drinking that salt water would kill you faster than if you didn't drink any water at all. Even though fresh water and salt water look nearly identical, their effects couldn't be more opposite. One replenishes and strengthens your body, and the other harms your body. In a similar way, sexuality is expressed in many different forms. Forms that can look similar from the outside. Depending on the details, however, they can have a totally different effect. So what are those details that make such a big difference? Let's start with the biggest. The presence of another actual person. In a pornographic sexual experience, rather than interacting with another human being, your physiological system is being manipulated to respond to an image with the body provoked by someone who is not really there. As this happens, your brain releases oxytocin, which is referred to as the bonding chemical. This chemical is meant to create a sense of connection or bond between two loving individuals. In a pornographic experience, however, that chemical is being released in association with a hollow image behind a computer screen or a magazine page. That is pretty confusing to the brain, and over time, your ability to bond with another real person weakens. Basically, pornography is a counterfeit. It's a lie. What it teaches you about sex and those you are attracted to is not only false, but in many cases, it's also destructive. It won't bring you a sense of connection, acceptance, or love. It won't vitalize or strengthen your relationship. It will slowly change your perceptions of women and men and distort your ideas of what a healthy sexual relationship should look like. We've said a lot so far about the research showing the true effects of pornography. In spite of this, people still sometimes laugh and joke about the idea that pornography could become a harmful addiction. They might say, "Oh, come on, I've never seen anyone's teeth fall out because of pornography." Or, "So what's the big deal?" So let's talk about it and get specific. After hundreds of studies, it's clear that pornography has some serious effects on the brain and our relationships. The United States Congress asked Dr. Jill Manning, a therapist who has worked with hundreds of pornography addicts, to review the research on pornography's effects and share what she found. In a special congressional hearing in November 2005, Dr. Manning shared a report detailing several areas of harm. First of all, there is clear evidence that long-term pornography use sets people up for feeling more depressed and empty than those who do not use it. One big reason for this is that the pleasure center in the brain gets so worn out by constant artificial stimulation that it simply stops being able to respond to more natural kinds of pleasure. Over time, users slowly start to become numb or desensitized to everyday activities. Plain and simple, life can start to feel pretty dull when we're exposing ourselves to unnatural levels of artificial stimulation all the time. Everything else can eventually become as boring as an hour-long infomercial about tube socks. One of the scariest effects of extended pornography use is how it starts to change our experiences with other people. On a broad level, pornography use can cause people to feel less interested in caring about others around them. Well, what about romantic partners? One of the things many people look forward to most in life is a relationship, an exciting romance with a satisfying sexual experience. Some people believe that pornography helps to improve our sexuality and make romance even more exciting. However, studies actually show the opposite is true. Pornography creates less closeness between partners, less excitement romantically, and less satisfaction in real sexual experiences. Not only that, but it also actually increases the user's appetite for more porn. It's almost like we can't be satisfied once we develop this kind of appetite. We're always seeking for more. Researchers at Dartmouth's Social Health Psychology Lab discovered that racy scenes in movies and TV shows also lead to sex at an earlier age with more casual partners and more unsafe. If racy scenes on television are negatively influencing us, just imagine the effect of hardcore pornography has. Unfortunately, there are more serious problems that breed from pornography addiction. such as having completely unrealistic expectations about our sexual partners. Researchers have found that after being exposed to pornography, subjects were less satisfied with their partner's affection, physical appearance, sexual curiosity, and sexual performance. A friend of ours named Maria told us that after she was newly married, she and her husband started looking at pornography together to spice up their love life. After a while, they started looking at pornography on their own. And over time, they ended up preferring the computer screen to the real thing. Eventually, her marriage fell apart. She was able to recover, but her ex-husband never did. Unfortunately, Maria is not alone. This is an epidemic that is sweeping across developed countries and harmfully impacting families and relationships. Research indicates 56% of all divorces in the US involved at least one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. Another harmful effect of pornography is that it has caused many individuals to become uncomfortable with real bodies and think that the photoshopped images and unrealistic videos they've been exposed to are what they should expect. One counselor called this problem sexual attention deficit disorder, saying just as people with real ADD tend to be easily distracted, guys with SADD have become so accustomed to the high levels of visual novelty and stimulation that they're unable to focus on a real woman. And guess what? The same thing goes for women in general. They begin to compare their sex lives to what they see as much more glamorous and arousing on screen. Therapist Susan Orbach writes of an eroding individual appreciation of the unaltered human form. And another researcher summarized her findings from hundreds of interviews by saying that individuals are developing a distorted sense of what a normal woman's body is, adding, suddenly a normal woman's body looks abnormal. In addition to distorting perceptions, expectations of sexuality, relationships, and the appearance of partners, the FBI's statistics show that pornography is found at 80% of the scenes of violent sex crimes or in the homes of the perpetrators. But let's go back to where the rubber hits the road for all of us. Our relationships. And not just any relationships, but the ones we care about most. Research shows that pornography leads people to care less about committing to anyone for very long, especially in marriage. Statistics show that if they do get married, individuals with pornography problems are more likely to have tension with their partner, to have less interest in having children, and to pay less attention to the children that are born. They also have an increased likelihood of cheating, separation, and divorce. Oh, good old pornography, supporting family values since never. Look, don't get discouraged though. The opposite pattern is also true. Individuals who leave pornography behind and cultivate a healthy perception of what bodies should look like are significantly more likely to be involved in a committed, healthy relationship. As we said at the beginning, today can be a new day for any one of us. Before diving into exploring your own situation, we need to talk about something pretty serious. One more facet of this industry aiming to make you a lifelong customer. To those of us who end up watching it, pornography can appear to be a fantasy world of pleasure and thrills. The experiences of those who create and participate in making pornography, however, are often flooded with drugs, disease, rape, and abuse. It's easy to be unaware of all these shady details that go in behind the scenes. The pornography industry wants to keep it that way, as secretive as possible. Fortunately, more and more former porn stars are speaking up. For example,
I got this kicked out of me. Most girls start crying because they're hurting so bad. I couldn't breathe. I was being hit and choked constantly. I was really upset and they didn't stop. They just kept filming. I asked them to turn the camera off and they just kept going.
in order to prevent the police and the public from finding out about the conditions pornography is created under, it's common for pornographers to intimidate or use blackmail as a weapon to silence their participants. Many former porn stars talk about being booked to do a scene only to have the conditions change on the spot, which often led to uncomfortable, abusive experiences. In a very real way, then, porn stars get treated like convenient cattle. They are lied to by the industry's doctors about the prevalence of sexually transmitted diseases, and many abuse drugs to cope with their emotionally deteriorating lives. Another actor said,
You're viewed as an object and not as a human with a spirit. People don't care. People do drugs because they can't deal with the way they're being treated. 75% of porn stars are using drugs. They have to numb themselves. There are specific doctors in the industry that if you go to them for a common cold, they'll give you Vicodin, Viagra, whatever you want, because all they care about is money. You're a number. You have to numb yourself to go on set. The more you work, the more you have to numb yourself.
Working in pornography isn't the dream job that pornographers want people to believe it is. And yet, because the industry is legally recognized by the government, it comes with a false sense of security. In addition to keeping people quiet, doctors are employed by the industry to watch over the actors and actresses. Because these doctors are paid to support the pornographers, they don't act to protect their patients, and the STDs remain a huge problem in the industry.
So, like when I was in the industry, the fear of body fluids was absolutely just disregarded. There's no protection or hygiene at all. We weren't even allowed to use condoms. The constant spreading of germs, like disease-ridden material, it's not even considered by the employees of the production companies. Things like, props, furniture, cleaning towels, they're not thoroughly sanitized or sterilized. Like that is unsanitary, completely unsafe.
Okay, so we have rape, coercion, and preventable diseases. Well, what else happens? Sex trafficking, aka modern slavery for sexual purposes. That's what. You might be thinking, wait, that stuff really happens? Sadly, yes. Sex trafficking is a $32 billion per year industry. According to the UN, more than 9.7 million people around the world are ensnared in sex slavery at any given time, including young boys and girls. And guess what the majority of these individuals are forced into doing? You guessed it, porn. Their lives are threatened if they don't make it look like they're enjoying what they're doing. That means the millions of people who think they're viewing harmless porn are often literally watching someone being forced against their will to participate in sexual acts.
I literally became a prisoner. I was not allowed out of his sight, not even to use the bathroom, where he watched me through a hole in the door. He slept on top of me at night. He listened to my phone calls with a .45 automatic 8-shot pointed at me.
I mean, it's hard to imagine, but could it get any worse? Unfortunately, it can, and it does. One actress was reported missing after a film session. A month later, she was found with multiple stab wounds with DNA evidence tying her murder back to her photographer. Some might think, that kind of thing happens all over, not just in the pornography industry. Well, that's true. However, these stories and testimonies from ex-porn stars are surfacing more and more. Some that have escaped have dedicated their lives to speaking out against the industry, such as Shelley Lubin, Elizabeth Rawlings, and Danielle Williams. During the development of the Fortify program, we received several direct emails from former porn stars telling us their stories. Nearly all of them asked that we keep their identity a secret for fear of being harmed by their former employers. Here's an example of one of those emails.
I speak from experience to say that there are victims and survivors who have been drugged and forced into this ugliness against their wills. I realize that this statement flies in the face of the mainstream, stereotypical, mono-thought mentality that porn is voluntary, and that, she likes it, she asked for it, she chose it. Although that may be true for some, many are coerced into agreeing with whatever their pornographer says just to stay alive. We have been humiliated beyond description and carry that with us 24/7. Our minds are numbed and in many cases drugged into stupor or amnesia for the painful tearing at our bodies and our souls just to be filmed, forever recorded for someone's sick fantasy to come alive for momentary gratification. I was drugged before each filming. Sometimes it was with an amnesiac, sometimes with a paralyzing drug, sometimes with pain blockers, and sometimes a crazy combination of all of the above. We lie to cover up the truth, much the same way the victim of domestic abuse lies, conceals, and hides. We do not have the words to speak out because our pain is too graphic, and it is next to impossible to describe what happened to us because of the mainstream mentality. We are met with dismissals and denials, with excuses, like that couldn't have happened because girls and women look like they enjoy what's happening to them. Some of us have succumbed to drug addictions, some to insanity, some to crippling isolation, and others to death.
Wow. Doesn't that leave you a little sick to your stomach? Not only does pornography have harmful effects on the user, but the industry itself and those who participate in it deal with incredible harm to their bodies and overall lives. Now, bottom line, the industry's efforts to portray an atmosphere of glamour, fame, and fortune have allowed them to get away with illegal, unethical, and corrupt behavior. In addition to all the personal reasons you have to rebel against this industry, keep in mind the reality of those being victimized every day. We don't have to stand for it. Not anymore. All right, fighters. We know the last video was heavy, but knowing what you now know is a crucial part of understanding our enemy. Now it's time to get more specific on how exactly we're going to beat this thing. The real reason you're here is you want to get rid of this addiction. You've been trapped for far too long, spinning like dirty laundry, and you've had enough. We want to help you get out. And to do that, we need to first talk about what exactly you're stuck in. Have you ever heard of the addiction cycle? The addiction cycle is something that you're probably familiar with, whether you realize it or not. That's because many of us have been gripped in its headlock for a long time. This cycle describes the pattern many of us get stuck in. A pattern that we're not usually entirely conscious of. In fact, one reason the addiction cycle has such a hold over us is that it usually goes undetected by our radars. So, we're going to change that right now. By talking about the cycle openly, we're going to begin decreasing its power over all of us. Let's give you a visual to reference as we talk about it. If you look up in the top left corner of the addiction cycle, you'll see start. That's where we all begin. You'll notice above that there are several life problems that you're probably familiar with. These discomforts are normal and unavoidable. Everyone has them to some degree or another. Stress, anxiety, pressure, boredom, and loneliness happen to all of us. And it's natural to want relief from these discomforts. What pushes someone toward addiction is when we start to respond to these discomforts of life in one specific way, trying to escape them. What do we mean by that? Seeking relief, of course, can be a good thing. We're not talking about all the positive things you can do to relieve pain when you're hurting. We're talking about an extreme demand to get rid of any discomfort we are facing at any cost. For many people facing addiction, trying to find an immediate escape from these discomforts of life is a big reason they drink, smoke, do drugs, or use porn. Scientific research has confirmed that trying to escape from discomfort lies at the heart of many addictions. After all, thinking that we shouldn't feel what we're feeling makes it easy to start thinking that we've got to find something to numb us out. It's at this point that it becomes easy to start to think about some website or a video that will bring immediate but temporary relief. We call this entertaining the idea of using. In most cases, this all happens without our even realizing it, without us even being aware that this cycle is even going on and pulling us in. At this point, we have released the steering wheel and let autopilot drive the bus. It's something that we all do sometimes when we're distracted and not paying attention to what we're really thinking, feeling, or experiencing. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever found yourself going through the motions without really thinking about the consequences? And before you know it, you've used again. When we're in autopilot mode, we often fall, robot-like, into vulnerable situations. When this happens, our addiction is steering our actions, leading us to just go along with whatever our addiction wants. For drug users, this can mean winding up under the bridge downtown where the dealers slum around, or hanging out with a user friend from their past. With pornography, this could be booting up your computer when no one is around and locking the door. It could be wandering around a movie rental place or dilly-dallying down a magazine aisle of a bookstore. It is putting yourself in an environment in which you normally get exposed to pornography. We call this moving toward using, or starting the ritual. Can you start to see yourself in this cycle at all? By recognizing what's happening, you'll be in a good place to learn how to step out of the cycle. Let's keep going. You're on autopilot, moving toward using. At this point, anticipation builds. Your focus narrows, and resisting the urge seems impossible. So we give in. We use and get that temporary numbing feeling, like another cigarette or drink or a food binge. A porn binge triggers a chemical rush in seconds. Our emptiness, anxiety, or boredom is again covered up and relieved in some way. And for that moment, we have some distraction from whatever discomfort we were feeling. The problem is that soon we feel even worse than we did before. In the long run, the discomfort not only doesn't go away, but it also gets worse because we haven't dealt with what the real problem is. But we're not usually paying attention to this. In fact, we can become so anxious about not feeling this discomfort that we don't care very much about the fact that we feel worse later on. We're calling that experiencing harmful effects. This is the ironic part of the cycle. As pornography becomes the primary solution of dealing with the discomforts of life, it can actually become the cause of stress rather than the relief from it. As the discomforts of life increase, we can begin to use even more and more pornography to escape the increasing amount of pain and discomfort arising from the cycle. And the next time life gets a little anxious, hard, or boring, we think again, why do I need to feel this when I can have relief? You know, the cycle perpetuates and we spiral downward as the harmful effects compound. Pretty soon, we're trapped inside something we didn't even really want. An emotional cancer that is multiplying out of control, hijacking our freedom and our ability to live a healthy lifestyle. So let's go through this with an example that you might experience. Let's say your parents left the house for a few hours and you're home alone. For the first little while, you start working on some homework. You know, after a while, you get some hard assignments and you feel yourself feeling uncomfortable and starting to get a little anxious. At this point, you have a choice, although you may not realize it. Is it okay to feel some anxiety, or do I have to make it go away? Your reaction is almost automatic. I don't want to feel this. I've got to take a break and get some relief. Rather than being okay with a little anxiety and continuing your homework, you've just taken your first step into the cycle. So you turn on the computer and you surf around a bit. With no one else at home, you realize that you could explore websites that you normally wouldn't if others were around. You know, at first, you resist. But the idea, it keeps coming back, and pretty soon you start rationalizing. You know, I won't look at anything really bad, so you check again just to make sure you're still alone. But before you know it, you've used again. You know, after that, you feel empty, disappointed, or maybe even embarrassed. You think to yourself, how on earth did I let this happen? Well, our answer is, dude, you just fell in the addiction cycle again. Did you notice the other steps of the cycle we discussed? After taking that first step, it went boom, boom, boom. Entertaining the idea of using, moving toward using, then experiencing the harmful effects and discomfort getting worse. We're usually not aware of these steps, but if we are, it can help us do something about them. Now that you're aware of the addiction cycle, you probably realize something pretty cool, something that we talked about earlier. You are not your addiction. You now have a visual of the larger problem, and it's not just about you. You can finally separate yourself from your behaviors and start to look at your addiction in a new way. You now have a bird's eye view of the problem, and as you look around, you begin noticing places throughout the addiction cycle where you can step out of it. These are called choice points, and that's where we're heading next. As the addiction cycle drags someone along toward using again and again and again, it is understandable that he or she can feel a bit hopeless. After months and years of feeling dragged through the cycle, it can feel like there's no way out, no options, no other way forward. When you're in the middle of the cycle, especially when you're unaware that it's happening, let's admit it, that feels true. Like someone lost in a maze and not even realizing they're in a maze. There's little chance you're going to find your way out. But what if you did realize you were in a maze or a cycle that was leading you in circles? What if someone handed you a map of these larger patterns and started showing you where you were going wrong, along with all the other paths available to you? Would that change things for you? Well, here's some good news about the addiction cycle. There is a way out. Like a prison that seems impossible to escape, if you watch and listen carefully, there are places to chip away and finally break out of it. These points of possible choice arise at different times and in moments that will surprise you. As you take advantage of these escape routes, you will be able to slip out of the addiction cycle and walk free. Viktor Frankl, a renowned therapist and a Holocaust survivor, once said, "Between stimulus and response, there is space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom." This may sound strange at first, but think about it. As an addiction becomes stronger, there seems to be no spaces at all. Like an old trail, the moments of choice become grown over, hidden, and seemingly impossible to find. And so we get lost. Ready to find that trail again? Go ahead and look at the cycle again with the added choice points. You'll notice that there are 4 main choice points throughout the cycle that give us the opportunity to step out and move into a new direction toward freedom. As we discussed earlier, the discomforts of life are something that we all feel. No one is immune to this. It's part of life. However, like we said, it's all about how we respond to those discomforts that makes the difference, whether or not you go down the addiction cycle or go in a better direction. On one hand, those that choose to respond to those discomforts in a healthy way avoid the cycle altogether. Instead of trying to just escape the discomforts, there are an infinite variety of things that we can do in the moments of discomfort to help us work with and move through these feelings. Talking with friends, getting outside, reading something, taking some quiet time. Those are just a few examples. If you continue to respond in a healthy way, guess what? The discomforts of life can actually begin to decrease over time. They don't feel as heavy, and some of those discomforts can even go away for good. And then on the other hand, if we try to escape, we're not focused on adjusting our lives in the way that gets to the root of the discomfort. Instead, we're focused on something else, making the discomfort go away, now. And there goes your first choice point. Do you really want to make that choice? Do you really have to focus your energy on escaping the discomfort immediately? Or are there some other steps that are wiser, that will lead you to real long-lasting relief? Soon, we'll be talking about more details of what these healthier steps look like. But for now, we just want to point out that a choice exists right where we weren't looking, between the moment of discomfort and the moment of deciding we have to escape. But do we really have to escape? Let's say we decide we do want to make the discomfort go away by escaping rather than facing it. Well, what's next? You're feeling anxious, hungry, bored, tired, or sad, and you want a distraction. You've been trying to stay away from porn, but even so, you decide to get on the internet. Not to search for porn, of course, just to browse. Because you're anxious to get rid of the discomfort, though, this innocent browse takes a turn. You're on YouTube and a questionable thumbnail for a video down in the corner draws your eye. And a thought comes. Oh, it's not a big deal, or this doesn't hurt anyone. Have you ever said that to yourself? Remember, this addiction cycle is powerful. It can sway our willpower and fool us. At that moment, if you don't see what's going on and step away, even more rationalizations will kick in. You know everyone's into this. Don't be such a prude, so old-fashioned. No one's going to find out about this. This is going to be totally fun. You can always stop later. If you are paying attention, you will recognize the moment all this propaganda starts hitting you as a second choice point. Another chance to escape from this miserable cycle. So what do we mean? In the past, it's understandable if you've done what many do, accepting the rationalizations and following them as if they were reality. But what if you saw them differently? What if you saw them as a programmed script that was being fed to you? A script that you can notice and reject. We'll say more about that soon. For now, just realize that you just discovered another moment to take control. Another place where you don't have to be blindsided by the enemy anymore. You've already got 2 moments where you can step away from the cycle. If you choose not to take those turns, then naturally you will end up moving toward using. Now you're closing the curtains and adjusting the computer's volume. Now there's no turning back. Or is there? Actually, it's not too late. It's never too late to step away. Right before using, you still have a choice to ask yourself, is this what I really want? As you begin to pay closer attention to your experiences, you can pinpoint where you are in the cycle and notice the choice points along the way. It's never too late to catch yourself and step away. And that includes the moment after you've started to use. When that happens, you might be tempted to think, there, now you've blown it. No use holding back anymore. You've done it again. Watch those thoughts. Notice how you feel. Is this what you really want to do? Do you really have to continue? Even if you feel that temporary relief, do you really feel better deep down? Maybe for a second. But then what happens? You feel worse. Feeling worse could be a wide range of things, from guilt, less satisfaction in relationships, stress in relationships due to use, and so on, as the discomforts of life increase. Even after using, there are choice points available. Do I have to keep going for a long time? Can I stop sooner? Even after using, you can realize, I'm better than this. The earlier you respond in the cycle, of course, the easier it will be to take that step toward freedom and move in the direction that you really want to go. But setbacks happen, and once they do, we need to learn from them. We can learn to see the kinds of conditions that set the stage for a setback and learn how to adjust and avoid them. As you practice this skill of watching your experience carefully and recognizing choice points, you will find yourself gaining more and more strength. Strength not to be dragged around anymore. Strength to do what you really want and not be forced against your will. You may even be able to prevent some battles entirely. It's important to realize, of course, that just because we start to notice choice points, that doesn't suddenly make things easy. You've likely been doing this long enough that your brain has been hardwired to act a certain way. And those habits aren't going to change overnight. In the upcoming module, we're going to give you an awesome tool to help get your brain in gear. First, though, let's go over some strategies for working with thoughts when they get a little crazy. Have you ever wanted to shut off your thoughts? When facing an addiction, it's normal to have thoughts that hit us rapid fire, pushing us one way or another and making us feel a little controlled. Is there anything we can do in those moments? Of course, it's easiest in the short term to simply give in to the thoughts and let them carry us wherever they're going. We all know where that leads. The only other option seems to be trying to control and manage these thoughts by trying to force them away. Ever tried this? While this can work for a short time, it can wear us out in the long term. So, is there another way? What can we do instead? How about this? Watch your thoughts. Instead of trying to control the thoughts we don't like by forcing them away, try watching them instead. Sort of like you'd watch an interesting movie or like a scientist would watch an experiment. As you try watching your thoughts, you will discover something interesting. Thoughts come and go on their own, like waves in a sea. They sometimes change on their own like weather patterns. The brain is constantly producing thoughts to help us make sense of the world. Over time, you can come to see these thoughts for what they are. Just thoughts, rather than your reality or who you are. In other words, you can come to see that you're not your thoughts. As you begin to relate to your own thoughts in this way, you can begin to develop a pretty cool skill. Watching your mind without getting pulled into the action. Oh, there's that rationalization coming up again. Here's that propaganda again. In this way, you can learn to observe your thoughts without blindly following them and without having to act on them. The same is true with feelings. While it might sound strange, don't worry. This skill is very learnable, provided you're willing to work at it a little bit. The first time you practice watching your thoughts, you may be surprised at how hard it is and how crazy thoughts can be. One person described her thoughts as kind of like wild monkeys swinging from tree to tree all over the place. Can you relate? With some practice over time, you will notice thoughts starting to behave themselves and calm down a bit. But in the meantime, you might have to be patient with some wild monkeys. So here's the skill in very simple form. Practice watching thought rather than being thought. Practice watching feeling rather than being feeling and living every feeling out. It's definitely not easy at first, but the more you do it, the better you'll become. And depending on how you respond to thoughts, you can gain more or less control over them. In the next module, we'll give you some awesome tools that will help you get this skill down like a pro.